When Daniel 9:27 talks about making a covenant with many, what are these verses talking about? Unfortunately, there's a lot of false teaching out there regarding who the many is. But as we shall see from a clear reading of Scripture, context speaks volumes that these passages are talking about the nation of Israel. Many have assumed that the rapture will begin the tribulation. However, this is not so, for the tribulation begins with the signing of a 7-year covenant between the Antichrist and Israel. Two key passages bear this out. The first passage is in Daniel 9:24 through 27, which contains the famous prophecy of the 70 weeks or 77s of Daniel the prophet. In this passage, a 490-year period is decreed over the Jewish people. A careful study of this text will show that the first 483 of the 490 are now history, having been fulfilled at the time of the first coming of the Messiah. However, there are 7 years left to run in God's prophetic time clock for Israel. These are the same 7 years as those of the Great Tribulation. The issue now is this: what is the one event that begins these last 7 years ticking away? Daniel 9:27 answers the question. This verse speaks of an individual making a 7-year covenant with the Jewish nation. The he refers to the prince that shall come in verse 26. This person is better known as the Antichrist. When the Antichrist signs a 7-year covenant with Israel, the last 7 years of God's prophetic time clock for Israel begin ticking away. This and only this is the starting point of the 7 years of the tribulation. In light of this, it should be very evident that it is not the rapture which begins the tribulation. While the rapture will occur sometime before the tribulation, it may come a number of years before the tribulation. The point is, it is the signing of the 7-year covenant between Israel and the Antichrist that begins the tribulation. The second passage is Isaiah 28:14 through 22. Notice in verse 14, God calls the ones making this covenant scoffers. He considers them mockers rather than serious leaders. Verse 15 gives the real reason God considers them thus and provides God's viewpoint of the covenant itself. It is obvious that the leaders of Israel will enter into this covenant in order to obtain some measure of security and to escape the overflowing scourge. The figure of a flood, when used symbolically, is always a symbol of a military invasion. The leaders of Israel will believe that by entering the covenant, they will be free from any further military invasions. However, God declares that this is not a covenant of life, but a covenant of death. It is not a covenant of heaven, but a covenant of hell. Rather than gaining security, they will receive a strong measure of insecurity. Verse 16 speaks of the remnant who refuse to enter into the covenant. Verses 17 through 22 describe the results of the making and the breaking of the covenant. The key result is the wrath of God emphasized in verse 21 and 22. Two of the Old Testament names for the tribulation are given in this passage: Jehovah's strange work and Jehovah's strange act. It is given these two unusual names because of the latter phrase in verse 22. For a decree of destruction I have heard from the Lord, Jehovah of hosts, upon the whole world. This decree is issued in heaven because of the covenant that is signed on earth. It is strange in that it calls for the destruction of the whole earth. The same point made in Daniel 9:27 is made by Isaiah. The tribulation begins with the signing of the 7-year covenant between the leaders of Israel and the Antichrist. Once the covenant is signed, the tribulation begins and a decree of destruction is issued by God himself. Though the whole world will be involved in the Great Tribulation, it particularly will affect Israel, as evident from the massive amount of Old Testament scripture concerning this time period. Number 1, the time of Jacob's trouble. The uniqueness of the tribulation's relationship to Israel is especially brought out in Jeremiah 30, verses 4 through 7. While the scriptures have many names for this great tribulation, in this passage a name is given that directly relates the tribulation to the Jewish nation, the time of Jacob's trouble. While it is true that all will suffer during that time, Israel will suffer more so. The basic reason for this lies in Israel's relationship to God as God's firstborn, and therefore receives double both in blessing and cursing. The principle that Israel receives double for all her sins is stated in Isaiah 40, 1 through 2, and Jeremiah 16, 16 through 18. This is the reason the tribulation is uniquely the time of Jacob's trouble. The Day of Jehovah passages. There are 5 Day of Jehovah passages that directly relate the Great Tribulation to Israel. First, Ezekiel 13, 1 through 7, describes the Day of Jehovah in relationship to the false Jewish prophets and the tribulation. The multiplication of false prophets among Israel will require a massive cleansing, described in Zechariah 13. Second, in Joel chapter 2, 1 through 11, the Day of Jehovah is depicted as a time of darkness and invasion. Third, in Joel chapter 3, 14 through 17, the Day of Jehovah is described as the time of refuge for Israel. In Amos 5, 18 through 20, the Day of Jehovah is again depicted as the time of darkness. And in Zephaniah 1, 7 through 13, the Day of Jehovah is portrayed as being especially heavy against Jerusalem. Worldwide anti-Semitism and the persecution of the Jews. The breaking of the 7-year covenant marks the beginning of a worldwide persecution of the Jews. 2 key passages describe what will happen to the Jewish people during the tribulation. The first passage is Matthew 24, 15 through 28. In this passage, Christ provided a warning sign to those Jews living at the time the covenant is broken, and the abomination of desolation occurs, which commences the persecution of the Jews. They are warned that as soon as they hear of that event happening, they are to get out of Israel and to do so quickly. The emphasis is on a speedy flight. The reason for the flight is because at this point, worldwide anti-Semitism breaks out. The worldwide persecution of the Jews begins and will continue for the next 3.5 years. Verses 23 through 28 of Matthew 24 contain a special message directed to the believing remnant within Israel, warning them not to heed any rumor that the Messiah has returned and so coming out of hiding. When the Messiah does return, all will be able to see him and will be known by all. Israel and Satan. Revelation 12, 1 through 17 is the central passage describing Satan's relationship to Israel during the tribulation. At that time, there will be an all-out, satanically organized campaign to wipe out the Jews once and for all, on the model of the Nazis' final solution. To what extent will Satan succeed in destroying the Jews? Zechariah 13, 8 through 9 provides the answer. And it shall come to pass that all in the land, saith Jehovah, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein. And I will bring the third part into the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. And they shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, Jehovah is my God. In the Holocaust under Hitler, 1/3 of the world's Jewish population died. Under the fierce persecution of the Antichrist, controlled and energized by Satan, 2/3 of the Jewish population will die. This will be the largest and most intense persecution of the Jews ever known in Jewish history. Israel and Michael. Michael, besides being the archangel, is also the chief prince and the protector of Israel. The key passage pointing out Michael's relationship to Israel in the tribulation is Daniel 12, verse 1. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, who standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as was never since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. The fact that Israel will survive at all is due to the ministry of the archangel and chief prince, Michael. Now notice there are 4 different groups of Jews in the tribulation. During the Great Tribulation period, there will be 4 distinct groups of Jews. The first group can be entitled the apostate Jews. These are the many of Daniel 9:27 that I talked about in my introduction, who will enter the 7-year covenant that will begin the tribulation. They will comprise about 2/3 of the nation and will die in the worldwide persecution in the tribulation. The second group is known as the 144,000 Jews. They are part of the 1/3 that will survive the tribulation. These are the Jews who will be saved and sealed sometime after the rapture of the church. They will be evangelists during the first half of the tribulation, conducting a worldwide revival. The third group can be entitled as other Hebrew Christians. These are Jews who will receive the Messiah via the preaching of the 144,000, the 2 witnesses, and some other way, but they are not part of that number. The fourth and final group is called the faithful remnant. Since they are the key group involved in the second half of the tribulation, let's look a little closer as to who this group is. The remnant is the part of Israel that believes. In the tribulation, there will also be a believing remnant. All individual Jews who become believers during the 7 years of the tribulation are part of the remnant of Israel. These include the 144,000 Jews. These also include those Jews of Jerusalem who become believers in the middle of the tribulation, Revelation 11:13. It includes all individual Jews who become believers as a result of the preaching of the 144,000 or the 2 witnesses of Revelation 11. It includes the remnant of Revelation 12, verse 17, whom Satan will attack in a particular way. There will be a large segment of the Jewish population who will become members of the remnant of Israel only at the end of the tribulation. These can be called the faithful remnant. Based upon all the passages involved, the group will comprise the majority of the 1/3 of the nation that will survive the tribulation. Throughout the tribulation, they will be unbelievers as far as the messiahship of Jesus is concerned, and also unbelievers as far as the Antichrist is concerned. These are the non-many of Daniel 9:27, who will refuse to have anything to do with the covenant. They are the ones who shall not be in haste of Isaiah 28, verse 16. They are faithful in the sense that they will believe in the God of Israel to the extent of the Old Testament revelation, and this is their trust. However, at the end, they will come to know Jesus as their Messiah. The fact that the remnant will survive is found in Isaiah 10, 20 through 23. And it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel, and they that are escaped of the house of Jacob, shall no more again lean upon that smote them, but shall lean upon Jehovah, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. A remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob, unto the mighty God. For though thy people Israel be as the sand of the sea, only a remnant of them shall return. A destruction is determined, overflowing with righteousness. For a full end, and that determined will the Lord Jehovah of hosts make in the midst of all the earth. Verse 20 states that unlike the rest of Israel, they will lean on the Holy One of Israel. In verse 21, Isaiah declares that ultimately they will return to the God of Israel, a return that can only be accomplished by faith in the Messiah Jesus.